guys, welcome back to Data Savvy TV. This is Vanessa and I'm going through the Codecademy tutorials with you. Just as a reminder, if you want to keep this video going but also have Codecademy up and practicing on your own, you can keep YouTube going on one side and then place Codecademy here on the other side, and that way you'll be able to type and listen at the same time. For those of you new to Codecademy and how their interface is set up, you can practice code right in your web browser. So they kind of have it set up with three panels. On the left they have all of the instructions for you to go through, and then you can actually run whatever task that they've given you and see if you get it right. And then this is where you actually, the second panel is where you type the code itself. And then over here on the right, this third panel shows you the results of your code. With SQL specifically, it's going to have your query results section up here and then a database schema section as well. Now let's get into the tutorial. I'm here on the Codecademy website and I'm going to go through the Learn SQL course with you today. This is going to be part 1 of 4 for the Learn SQL course. And today we're going to do manipulation in SQL. SQL stands for Structured Query Language. Some people pronounce it SQL, but both pronunciations are acceptable. We're going to be going through the following exercises: the introduction, what relational databases are, statements, creating a table, inserting data into a table, selecting data from a table, updating data, altering a table, deleting data, going over some constraints and some generalizations as well. So here on Codecademy, you'll be able to read a little bit about what the lesson's covering. Pretty much this is going over what SQL or SQL stands for, which is Structured Query Language. It's the programming language that you use to manage data in relational databases. In this particular instance, or in this course, you're actually working with SQLite or SQLite or SQLite, which is something that's file-based rather than having like a big engine behind it. Not that important for you to know necessarily as a beginner, but if you want to know what SQL version, whatever you want to call it, you're working with right now, it's SQLite. So we're going to start by entering a select statement, select star, which the asterisk means select all columns available in a table, and we'll show you right now what a table looks like. The table name is celebs, and I'll explain why I'm putting these on a different line here in a sec. So I'm going to run this. So here's your query results. This 3-column by 5-row grid right here is actually a SQL table. This first line are the column names, and then these other lines below it, the 4 lines below it, is your actual data. And then what Codecademy has done is given you a database schema. So I can go over this in a little bit more detail as we go along. But a database schema pretty much tells you what columns you have in your table and then what data type each column holds. So each column is going to be consistent in the type of information that it'll have in it. So in this example, ID has integers, name has text or strings. You'll also see the character and varchar for text type of data, and then integer again for this age column. So each time that you write a statement or do whatever the task is here on the left successfully, you'll see a green check mark. If you get stuck, you can always get a hint. You use the run button in order to run whatever you've typed in, and to go to the next lesson, you hit this button, next. This kind of corrected the entering that I did, but just to kind of give you an extra nugget here, most of the time in the professional world, we have each state, like every time there's a new SQL keyword, so SQL keyword would be select or from, we put it on a new line to make the code more readable. And then in a lot of SQL, SQL types of coding, you have to put the semicolon to end a statement. That's true most of the time. One instance where that is not necessarily true is with SQL Server, so Microsoft's implementation of SQL. And again, I'm trying to use SQL and SQL interchangeably because people use it interchangeably in the professional world. So anyways, a relational database is a database that organizes information into one or more tables. And in this particular database, we have the table, if you look over here to the right, where we selected all of the available columns from the celebs table. A table is just a collection of data organized into rows and columns. You can kind of think of it as, I've heard another YouTuber call it Excel on steroids. It's kind of the same structure. You have a grid with rows and columns. Same idea with a table. Excel and a database are definitely not a one-to-one thing. They're not the same thing. It's just a way for you to be able to connect that to something you might be more familiar with. So a column is a set of data values of a particular data type. So we had the ID, name, and age columns, and then the data types here on the right. And then the row is a single record in the table. So our first row in the celebs table is an ID of 1, the name is Justin Bieber, and age of 22. And then like we talked about with data types, an integer is a number, but it's also a whole number. If you wanted to use decimals, you'd use real. There's also a data type called decimal. And numeric is another data type for numbers. Text is a text string, and date is a date formatted with year, month, and day. Dates can come in all different ways in relational databases, and you'll probably see that more as we go along. There's nothing to do as far as a task for this second lesson on relational databases, so I'm just going to go ahead and click next. So statements. A statement is the actual text or the code that you're writing that a database sees as a command, and it always ends in a semicolon. I'll tell you always, just because it's best practice to put a semicolon. But again, if you're working with Microsoft SQL Server, they're not required, but it is best practice, especially if you end up going to a place that uses different implementations of SQL/SQL. Let's look at the different components of the statement. The create table portion is called the clause, and that could be referred to as a command or also as a SQL keyword. I've heard it called keywords most of the time when I was learning SQL. In this particular statement, the parameters to create a table is the column name, which they've show here as column _1, column _2, column _3, and its data type. So its data type would be like over here on the right, integer, text, that sort of thing. So let's go ahead and see what happens when we write a create statement here. So I'm going to write create table, and also best practice or common practice is to type the clause or the keywords in all caps, but you don't have to. You could write it like this in lower case as well. So create tables, name of the table that you're creating, and then I'm going to tab in a little bit, integer, so you can see where the different columns end up. And let's see. And we're not writing this all on one line because it makes this more readable. And again, I don't really have to type these in caps, but just to be consistent, oops, gotta spell it right. We'll write it like this, and we'll make it look like their example with the runs on the end. Okay, let's run this. Great, so typed this in correctly and we've created our table. Nothing comes over here when you run a create statement because you're not asking a query of the database, you're actually putting something into the database. So there's no query results to show. So let's move forward to the next lesson, which is create, which is kind of weird because isn't that what we just did? Okay, so now we're going to create a table, which is what we just did. Okay, that's a little bit more what we did. So this time we're going to go ahead and actually add data to the table we just created. And the clause for that is insert into the name of your table, which is celebs, and then the columns in that table, ID, name, and age. And the next keyword to actually say, okay, this is the data itself that I want to enter into this table in those columns I specified in that order, is the clause values. And then in parentheses, I add what the data is going to be. So my ID is going to be 1. My name is going to be Justin Bieber, and you have to put text in single quotes. That's how it knows that it's text and not a new clause or a different parameter or anything like that. And the age I want for this record is 21. And I'll put the semicolon. We'll run that. And now we've successfully run this piece of code. No query yet because we're adding data to a table. We're not asking the database to show us the result of a query. So this next task, to view the row you just created under the insert select statement, type this. In the real world, if I ran this statement again, I would see 2 records with 1 Justin Bieber 21 in a row. So I'll do it as they want me to do it. Ta-da! Okay. So now this is the result of our query. This is the data we just inserted. Yay for us. Okay, next lesson. Insert. Insert is just like we perform it and then it explains it. So it's kind of what I just went over if you want to read through this again. So this time we're going to add 3 more records to the table. So let's type this out. Insert into celebs, our table name, and then what columns we want it to insert into. We could just do ID and age and then do values 2 and 33 without a name, or we could do ID and name and not do an age if we wanted to, but the same number of columns that we have here is the same number of items we need to have in our list of what data we want inserted. So I'll change it back to what they want us to do. Beyonce Knowles 33, and to make this easier on myself, I'm going to copy this whole thing because we're going to keep inserting into the same table. Insert into celebs, but I got to make sure that I change these values. So we're going to change this to 3, and I'm just using Shift and the arrow keys to select the text here. Jeremy Lynn. The more keyboard shortcuts you can learn as you become a seasoned programmer, the better. The less you can rely on your mouse will just make you faster. So what I did to select these 2 words was I hold Control and Shift and then hit the arrow keys. So that makes it even faster to select something. Taylor Swift, and she's 26. So let's run this. Okay, so under the insert statements, which again I wouldn't recommend because you'd be duplicating the information you're putting into your table, select name, So this time, instead of using an asterisk, we're using the actual column name, which happens to be name. So this time we won't see ID and age when we run this statement. So if you look over here to the right, we only see the name column this time. If you had done select star, you would see ID, name, and age, but since we only wrote name, that's why we're only seeing the name column. So now that we know how to add rows to a table, let's edit a row. So update is the clause to change one single, well, it doesn't always have to be one single record, but to change records that meet your query's criteria. So we're going to update celebs, which is the name of the table, so update this table. Set, which is what we want changed. Set this column to 22, and I'll explain why it's the column and not the actual like record or anything, where ID equals 1. So what we're looking for is the record in the table where the ID is a 1, and when we find that record, we want to change the age from whatever it is right now to 22. And then we'll see the results of that in the same statement, or in the same, they're two separate statements, and we'll see it in the same, we'll run both queries at once. So here in this row, previously I believe this was like 24, 26, I don't remember, but we changed the age to 22 where our record ID was a 1. So set is the clause that indicates what column is going to be changed. Age was the name of the column that we just updated, and 22 is that new value that's going to replace whatever was there before. The where clause is really special. It's going to save you a lot of the time. Most of your SQL statements will have a where clause, especially when you're doing updates. So I would very much question your query or any queries that you're looking at that are updates, especially anything that's changing data or adding data or deleting data, and making sure you pretty much always have a where clause. It'll probably save you from updating everybody's age to 22. If we didn't have that where clause, then, and I didn't say where the ID is 1, all of these ages would have been 22. Now we're going to alter a table, which means we're going to either add a column, remove a column. It looks like on this one we're adding a column. So alter table is our first clause, table name, add column, and I would actually put this on a new line, Twitter handle. And this doesn't require parentheses like it did when we were creating the table initially. So we're adding a new column, and now we're going to see what that table looks like now that we have that new column added. Twitter handle, nothing is there, but no data anyway, but the column now exists. You're saying, I want to change a table in the statement, and we decided that we wanted to add a new column, and then we have to give it the column name and its data type. So even though this has like a 0 with a line through it, what it really has here is a value called null, which represents missing or unknown data. When we add a new column, any of the rows that existed before will have null values for that new column that we added, which was Twitter handle. Now we're just going to update the table for Taylor Swift's Twitter handle. So again, you definitely want to make sure that your where clause indicates the record that you want to change, because if we don't put the where clause in the statement, we're going to end up giving everybody the Twitter handle of @TaylorSwift13. So let's go ahead and write this statement. Update celebs, which is our table, set this column, Twitter handle, equal to @TaylorSwift13. And remember, because this is a string, we need to have the single quotes around it, where ID equals 4. I only want to update this row only. All of these will remain null. These first 3 records, the Twitter handle will stay null, and in the 4th one, it'll update. Make sure I end that statement with a semicolon. Excuse me. And I want to see the results of this as well. So select all, run. And now you see that Twitter handle for where ID equals 4, which is Taylor Swift's record, has now been updated to @TaylorSwift13. Looks like we got more to write. Okay. Now we want to delete all the rows that have a null value in the Twitter column. Let's add this delete from celebs table where the Twitter handle is null. If you didn't include this where, you'd be deleting everything. So that's again why wheres are important with update and delete statements. I'm going to write it exactly like I have it in the instructions. I'm going to put it between these other 2 existing statements. Delete from the celebs table where Twitter handle, can't type, Twitter handle is null. So the other special thing about null is whenever you're putting null in a where clause, nothing equals null. It's kind of weird. You have to say it is null because nothing can really equal null. There is an exception to that, but I won't address it now. If a future tutorial talks about stored procedures, then there's a case where you can have something equal null. So let's go ahead and run this. So I've ran these 3 statements. I updated the Taylor Swift, which we already did, and then deleted the records where the Twitter handle column is null. And then I selected everything from celebs, but now I only have the 1 record in here because this was the only record where the Twitter handle was not null. So this explains is null a little bit. It's a condition in SQL that returns true or false. And if it is null, it returns true. Is not null would be if you want to delete everything that has something in that column. We're going to create a new table, and this time we're going to add a constraint. So a constraint is, well, they kind of wrote it for us. A constraint kind of assigns certain, I guess you could call it characteristics to columns. And let's go ahead and run this, and I'll kind of talk through what all these mean. So we just created a table with 3 columns, and it's called awards. So constraints add information about how a column can be used. So a primary key is the unique identifier for a row. That means that no 2 rows can have the same exact ID in this case. Unique is kind of like primary key, except that you can have many unique columns, but you can only have 1 primary key. When you add not null to a column, that means that you always have to have a value in that column. It can never be unknown. It can never be null. Default, so what default does is that it automatically puts a value into the column for you if you don't specify what value you want in there. It'll default to not applicable. Why you wouldn't do that on every single column. So things like date of birth, you don't want a default value because you don't want to give everybody the same birthday. That's one reason. So let's see. Okay, that's it for constraints. Now it's just, hey, yay, you did it. You learned these statements. Create a table, insert data into the table, select data from a table, update data in a table, change an existing table with the alter table clause, and then also how to delete rows from a table. That's the first section. In the next video, I will be going through the queries section, which is how many lessons? Which will be 15 lessons. So hope to see you in the next one. If you have any questions, please be sure to leave them in the comment section below. And happy practicing, happy querying.